He thought it would be just another routine day in uniform, another report, another form, another call. But when Officer Daniel Harper looked down and saw two red-haired sisters standing in front of him, one wearing a simple black shirt, the other in a bright yellow one, something didn't feel routine anymore. The older girl didn't say much. She didn't have to. And the little one, only 3 years old, refused to let go of her sister's hand. That was the moment he knew. This wasn't just paperwork. This was something that would follow him home, something that would test his judgment. And days later, inside a quiet courtroom, he made a decision that no one expected, not even him. But what happened after that decision is why today, under a peaceful afternoon sky, those same two girls are standing beside him, and why this story is one he will never forget. Chapter 1, The Ordinary Day That Wasn't. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Daniel Harper had seen a lot of things in 26 years on the force. He had answered calls in snowstorms and heat waves. He had knocked on doors at 2 in the morning and at 6 in the evening. He had learned, after all that time, how to read a situation before he even stepped out of the car. He thought he knew what this one would be. A neighbor's concern, a routine check, a few questions, a form, and back on the road. But the moment he stepped onto that porch, something was different. The door opened before he could knock. A girl stood in the doorway, 14 years old maybe, red hair pulled back, wearing a plain black shirt. Her eyes were calm in a way that didn't quite belong to someone her age. Not nervous, not surprised, just ready. Like she had been expecting someone to show up eventually and had already decided exactly what she would and wouldn't say. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her name was Nora. Daniel introduced himself quietly, asked if everything was all right, asked if there was an adult home. Nora said her mother had stepped out. She said it the way someone says a line they've practiced. And then, from somewhere behind her, came a small sound. A little girl appeared at Nora's side, 3 years old, bright yellow shirt, red curls that went in every direction. She looked up at Daniel with wide, curious eyes. Then she reached up and took her sister's hand. Just like that. No hesitation. Her name was Lily. Daniel looked at the two of them standing there together, one so still, one so small, and felt something shift quietly in his chest. Not alarm, not urgency, something quieter than that. Something that felt almost like recognition. He asked a few more questions, wrote down his notes, looked around the room without making it obvious. The stack of envelopes near the door, the kitchen that showed signs of someone working hard to keep things running, the careful, tired order of a home being held together by will alone. Nora answered everything evenly. Lily never let go of her hand. Daniel thanked them, walked back to his car, and sat down. He looked at his notes. Routine visit. No immediate safety concerns. Follow-up recommended. He stared at those words for a moment. Then he looked back at the house. The curtain in the front window moved slightly, and for just a second, he saw Nora watching him from inside. Not with fear, with the kind of quiet watchfulness that said, "I've been doing this alone for a long time, and I'm not sure I can keep doing it." Daniel started the car. He drove back to the station, filed his report, answered 2 more calls before his shift ended. And that night, sitting in his kitchen with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, he kept thinking about that door opening before he knocked, about a girl who was ready, about a little one who just held on. He told himself it was just another case. He told himself he'd seen harder things. But when he finally went to bed, he lay in the dark for a long time, staring at the ceiling of a house that had been too quiet for too many years, and thought, something is wrong. And somebody has to pay attention. He didn't know yet that somebody would turn out to be him. He didn't know what that decision would cost, or what it would come to mean. But the next morning, he went back. Chapter 2. What the paperwork didn't show. Daniel told himself he was just following procedure. That's what he said when he pulled up to the house the next morning. That's what he said when he knocked on the door again, notepad in hand, coffee still warm in the cup holder of his patrol car. Procedure. That was all. But procedure didn't explain why he had looked up the case file at 6 in the morning before his shift started. It didn't explain why he had read every note, every prior call, every document attached to that address going back 3 years. And it didn't explain why none of it felt like enough. Nora answered the door again. Same steady eyes, same careful stillness. This time Lily was on her hip, one small arm wrapped around her sister's neck like a vine that had found its tree. She didn't sleep well, Nora said, not as an explanation, just as a fact. Daniel nodded, asked if he could come in for a few minutes. Nora stepped aside without a word. The house was clean. That was the first thing he noticed. Genuinely clean, not just surface level. The dishes were done. The floor had been swept. A small pile of folded laundry sat on the couch, organized by size. Nora had done all of it. He was certain of that without asking. He sat down at the kitchen table. Nora sat across from him, Lily now settled in her lap, pulling quietly at the hem of her sister's sleeve. Daniel asked simple questions at first. School, meals, routine. Nora answered all of them, carefully, completely. The way a person answers when they have thought about what they will and won't reveal and have decided firmly to stay inside the lines. But Daniel had been doing this for 26 years. He knew what careful sounded like. He also knew what exhausted sounded like underneath it. So he stopped asking about routine, and he asked something different. "What time do you usually wake up, Nora?" She paused, just for a second. "Around 5:30. Every day?" "Lily wakes up early." She said it without complaint, just fact. Daniel looked down at his notepad, wrote nothing, then looked back up. "And your mom? What time does she usually get home?" Another pause, slightly longer. "It depends on her shift," Nora said. Daniel nodded slowly. He didn't push. He had learned a long time ago that pushing too hard too fast closed doors that might otherwise open on their own. Instead, he looked around the kitchen again. He saw the notepad on the counter, a grocery list in a teenager's handwriting. He saw the medication reminder taped to the cabinet, written in the same hand. He saw the corner of a bill tucked under the fruit bowl, the word "final" visible in red along the top edge. Nora followed his eyes. For the first time since he had arrived, something flickered across her face. Not shame, not fear. Something closer to the look of someone who has been carrying a very heavy bag for a very long time and has just realized that someone else can see how heavy it is. She lifted her chin slightly. "We're doing fine," she said. And Daniel believed that she believed it. He stood up, thanked her, and walked back to his car. He sat there for a moment, looked at his notepad, one line written. Then he opened a fresh page and started writing everything he had actually seen. The grocery list. The medication note. The bill. The laundry folded by size. The dark circles under a 14-year-old's eyes. The way Lily reached for Nora like there was no one else in the world. He wrote it all down. Not because he was required to. Because someone had to. And something told him, quietly, the way important things often arrive, that this piece of paper might matter more than anyone could know yet. He was right. But he didn't know how right he was. Not yet. Nora has been holding everything together. But how much longer can she hold on? And what happens when the system finally takes notice? Chapter 3. Lily's tears in the back seat. It started as a routine follow-up. That's what Daniel wrote in his log that morning. Routine follow-up. Third visit. No escalation expected. He had learned after 26 years not to trust that word. Routine. It had a way of changing without warning. When he arrived at the house that afternoon, the front door was open. Not wide, just slightly, the way a door gets left when someone stepped out for a moment and planned to be right back. Daniel knocked. No answer. Knocked again. He heard Lily before he saw her. Not crying, just making the small, uncertain sounds a 3-year-old makes when something doesn't feel right, and she doesn't have the words for it yet. He pushed the door open gently and found them in the living room. Lily was sitting on the floor, shoes on the wrong feet. looking up at Nora with an expression that was working very hard not to become tears. Nora was kneeling in front of her, speaking quietly, calmly, the way someone speaks when they are also trying to keep themselves calm. "I know," Nora was saying. "I know, Lilybug, it's okay." Daniel stood in the doorway for a moment without speaking. Then Nora looked up and saw him. Something shifted in her expression. Not relief, exactly. More like the particular feeling of knowing that a moment you've been dreading has finally arrived, and there's nothing left to do but go through it. The social worker arrived 20 minutes later. A kind woman, genuinely so, buried under a caseload that would have overwhelmed anyone. She spoke gently to both girls. She explained, carefully, in simple words, that they would need to come with her and Daniel for a little while. Just for a little while. Nora nodded. She helped Lily put on her jacket. She zipped it all the way up, smoothed the collar, and then took her sister's hand. They walked to Daniel's patrol car together. Lily got in first, then Nora moved to follow, but the social worker touched her arm quietly and said there wasn't room, that Nora would ride with her in the other car, just a few minutes behind. They would be at the same place. It was meant to be simple, practical. Lily didn't understand. The moment Nora stepped back, Lily's face changed completely. She pressed her small hands against the car window and her mouth opened, and what came out wasn't a scream. It was something smaller and harder than that. A sound that had no strategy in it, no performance, just pure, unfiltered confusion and need. She wasn't afraid of Daniel. She wasn't afraid of the car. She couldn't see Nora, that was all. That was everything. Daniel stood by the door and watched it happen, and felt something move in him that he hadn't felt in a long time. Not pity. Something older than that. Something that recognized the sound of a person reaching for the one thing that makes the world feel safe. He looked at the social worker. She looked at him. He made a decision in about 3 seconds. He walked to the other car, opened the door, and asked Nora to ride with him instead. No paperwork reason. No procedural justification. Just a man who had been doing this job long enough to know that some things mattered more than logistics. Nora slid into the back seat beside Lily. Lily stopped crying immediately. She grabbed Nora's sleeve with both hands and didn't let go for the entire drive. Daniel watched them in the rearview mirror and said nothing. There was nothing to say. The quiet in that car was the most complete answer to any question he might have asked. That evening, he filed a formal written request, the first of many, that the sisters remain together in any and all future placements. He signed his name at the bottom. He didn't know yet what that signature would set in motion, but he was starting to understand that whatever came next, he was already part of it. Daniel has made his first move, but the system has its own plans, and what happens in that courtroom will test everything he believes. Chapter 4. The System Has a Plan. Daniel had been inside courtrooms before. He had testified in hearings, filed reports for judges, sat in hard wooden chairs waiting for his name to be called. He knew the rhythm of those rooms, the formal language, the careful distance, the way everything important got translated into procedure. He thought he knew what to expect. He was wrong. The family court hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. Daniel wasn't required to attend. He wasn't named in the case. He had no official role in what was about to happen. He went anyway. He sat in the back row and kept his jacket on and didn't say a word. The room was smaller than he remembered courtrooms being. Pale walls, fluorescent light, a table on each side, and a judge at the front who looked like someone who had made thousands of decisions in this room and carried all of them quietly. The social worker presented the case. She was thorough and fair. She laid out the facts clearly. The home situation, Michelle's history, the current status of the girl's placement needs. She spoke without drama, just information. Then the recommendation came. Nora, temporary placement at a juvenile shelter across town, structured environment, supervised, available immediately. Lily, foster placement with a family specializing in toddlers, experienced caregivers, safe and stable, separate locations, different sides of the city. The attorney nodded. The judge made a note. Everyone in the room moved forward as if the most important part had already been handled. Daniel looked at Nora. She was sitting in a chair near the front, slightly to the side, with a court-appointed advocate beside her. She was wearing a gray sweater. Her hands were folded in her lap. She had been still and composed through the entire hearing, the same careful stillness Daniel had seen on that first porch, on that first day. But when the words separated entered the room, something changed. Not dramatically. Nora didn't cry. She didn't move. She didn't make a sound. It was just her eyes. They went somewhere else for a moment, somewhere far and quiet and very, very tired. And then she came back, straightened slightly, folded her hands a little tighter. Daniel had seen a lot of things in 26 years. That was one of the hardest. He thought about Lily in the back seat, hands on the window. That sound she made, small and absolute, when she couldn't see her sister. He thought about the grocery list on the counter, the laundry folded by size, the medication reminder in a teenager's handwriting. He thought about what it meant to hold something together for that long, with that little, and then be told by a room full of adults that the solution was to take it apart. The judge moved to close the session. Daniel sat very still in the back row. He was not an impulsive man. He had built his entire career on patience, on procedure, on doing things the right way in the right order. But there are moments when a person looks at what is about to happen and understands, clearly with no room for doubt, that staying quiet would be its own kind of decision. He didn't stand up. He didn't speak out of turn. But when the session ended and the hallway filled with people gathering their things, Daniel found the social worker and spoke to her directly, calmly, specifically. He told her what he had observed, what he had documented, what he believed those documents showed about the bond between those two girls. She listened. She was tired. She had 40 other cases. But she listened. "You could file a formal request," she said quietly, "for joint placement consideration." "I know," Daniel said. "It probably won't change the recommendation." "I know that too." She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded and walked away. Daniel stood in that hallway alone for a moment. Then he walked to his car, drove back to the station, and sat at his desk until the building got quiet. And then he started writing. Daniel is putting everything on paper, but what he decides to do next will surprise everyone, including himself. Chapter 5. A Decision. Nobody expected Daniel didn't sleep much that night. He sat at his kitchen table with his notes spread out in front of him, and a lamp that was too bright for the hour, and a cup of coffee he kept forgetting to drink. The house was the way it always was after 10 o'clock. Completely still, the kind of still that used to feel like rest and somewhere along the years had started feeling like something else. He read through everything he had written, every observation, every detail, the grocery list, the bill with the red letters. Lily's hands on the window, Nora's eyes in that courtroom going somewhere far away for just a moment before she pulled herself back. He read it all twice. Then he opened his laptop and looked up something he had been thinking about since the hearing, something he half remembered from a training years ago. A provision, rarely used, almost never requested, that allowed a private individual to petition the court for temporary guardianship under judicial supervision in cases where standard placement options were under review. It wasn't adoption. It wasn't permanent. It was simply a way of saying, while you figure this out, let me make sure they stay together. He read the requirements 3 times. Then he closed the laptop and sat in the quiet for a long while. In the morning he went to see his captain. Captain Reeves was a fair man, practical, not unkind. He had known Daniel for 16 years and respected him in the straightforward way that people respect someone who has always done their job without making it complicated. He listened to everything Daniel said without interrupting. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked at him steadily. "You understand what you're describing," Reeves said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Daniel said. "This case is still open. You responded to the original call. If you insert yourself as a legal party, it creates a conflict of interest question that doesn't have a clean answer." "I know." Reeves was quiet for a moment. Then he said the part Daniel had been expecting and dreading in equal measure. If this goes sideways, if someone files a complaint, if the court flags it, your file gets reviewed, and your retirement package goes with it. He paused. 8 months, Daniel. You're 8 months out. The room was very quiet. Daniel had spent 26 years building something. Not wealth, not rank, just a clean record and a pension that meant he could stop without falling. 8 months. The finish line was close enough that he could see it clearly. He thought about that. He also thought about Nora's hands folded tightly in her lap, about Lily reaching sideways in the back seat, fingers searching for someone who wasn't there. I understand the risk, Daniel said. Reeves studied him for a long moment. Then he exhaled slowly through his nose and looked out the window. I can't stop you from filing a personal petition on your own time, he said carefully. What you do outside this building is your business. He looked back at Daniel. But I need you to understand that inside this building, I can't protect you if it becomes a problem. I'm not asking you to, Daniel said. He filed the paperwork that afternoon. His hands were steady when he signed it. He noticed that. He wasn't sure what it meant, whether it was confidence or simply the particular calm that comes after a decision has already been made and there's nothing left to do but follow it forward. That evening he came home, hung up his jacket, and stood in the hallway for a moment. There was a door at the end of the hall. Closed. It had been closed for a long time. He looked at it the way he always did, briefly, carefully. And then he went to the kitchen and made dinner. He didn't turn the photo on the counter face up, but for the first time in a while, he noticed it was there. Daniel has put everything on the line, but what he doesn't know yet is that someone is already watching, and not everyone wants him to succeed. Chapter 6. The Weight He Carries. The house had been bought for 3 people. Daniel never said that out loud. He didn't need to. It was visible in the small things. The way the kitchen had 2 of everything that should have had one. The extra hooks by the front door that held nothing. The garden in the backyard that someone had planted with care and that Daniel maintained out of habit and something he hadn't named yet. He moved through his mornings with the efficiency of a man who had learned to fill time deliberately. Coffee at 6, notes reviewed by 6:30, uniform on by 7. The routine was tight and purposeful and left very little room for the kind of quiet that asked questions. But the petition had changed something, not dramatically, just the way a window changes a room when it's opened after a long winter. Same room, different air. He was sitting at his desk at the station 2 days after filing when his phone lit up with a name he recognized immediately. Claire. He looked at it for 3 full rings. Then the screen went dark. He set the phone face down and went back to his paperwork. But his eyes didn't move across the page the way they usually did. They stopped somewhere in the middle and stayed there. Claire was his daughter, 31 years old, lived in Portland. They spoke 4, maybe 5 times a year, polite conversations that covered the necessary ground and left the important things carefully to the side. It had been that way for a while, since the funeral mostly. Since the period afterward when grief had made them both say things that were true, in the worst possible way, and had never quite been addressed since. He didn't call her back that evening. He told himself he would do it over the weekend, when he had more time, when he could do it properly. He told himself that and almost believed it. That same week, an envelope arrived at his home address, plain, official, from the court. His petition had been received and assigned to a judge. Preliminary review was scheduled. He would be notified of the date. He read it twice, folded it carefully, and placed it in the folder he had labeled simply with the girl's initials, N and L. The folder was getting thick. Documentation, observations, the written request from weeks earlier about joint placement. A small, careful record of everything he had seen and believed, and couldn't stop thinking about. He made dinner that night and ate standing at the counter, reading through his notes the way another man might read the news. At one point he stopped. There was a coffee mug on the shelf above the sink, white, with a small blue pattern around the rim. He had bought it years ago on a trip, One of those ordinary purchases that becomes extraordinary only later, only after the person who always reached for it first is no longer there to reach for it. He washed his own mug, dried it, and put it away in a different cabinet. Then he stood at the counter and looked at the blue-rimmed mug for a moment. He left it where it was. He went to his desk, opened his folder, and kept working. Outside, the neighborhood was going through its quiet evening routine. Porch lights coming on, a dog barking 2 houses down, the particular sound of ordinary life continuing at its ordinary pace. Daniel worked until 11. He was preparing for a hearing that might not go his way, fighting for 2 girls who weren't his, risking a retirement he had spent decades earning, and somewhere across the country, his own daughter's name sat on his phone screen, unanswered. He knew all of that. He picked up the pen and kept writing anyway, because sometimes the clearest thing a person can do is the thing directly in front of them. And right now, directly in front of him, were 2 names written in his own handwriting at the top of a folder. N and L. That was enough to keep going. For now. Daniel is carrying more than anyone knows. But what Nora has been hiding, quietly, privately for months, is about to come to light in the most unexpected way. Chapter 7. Nora's Letters. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. A woman named Patricia Hale, school counselor at Nora's middle school for 11 years. She had a calm, careful voice, the kind that came from years of sitting across from young people in difficult moments and learning how to be steady for them. She said she had something Daniel needed to see. He met her at the school the following morning before classes started. The hallways were empty, and the fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead. She led him to her office, small, warm, with plants on the windowsill and a bookshelf that had clearly been arranged by someone who found comfort in order. She placed a small bundle on the desk between them. Letters. 6 of them. Written on lined notebook paper, folded in thirds, each one addressed in careful handwriting to the same name. Grandma Ruth. Patricia explained that she had found them tucked inside the back cover of a library book Nora had returned 2 weeks earlier. She had read enough to understand what they were. She had contacted Daniel because his name was on the case file as the reporting officer, and because she didn't know what else to do with something this important. Daniel looked at the letters without touching them for a moment. Then he asked if Nora knew they had been found. Patricia nodded. I spoke with her yesterday. She was embarrassed at first. She paused. Then she said, and I want to make sure I get this right. She said, it doesn't matter anymore. Grandma Ruth already knows. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he asked if he could read them. Patricia slid them across the desk. They were not what he expected. He had prepared himself without realizing it for something dramatic, something that would confirm the worst, something that would make the situation feel as serious on paper as it did in his chest. But the letters were quiet. The first one was short, just a few lines about the weather and about how Lily had learned to say a new word that week. The second one mentioned school, a test Nora thought she had done well on, a book she was reading. The third one talked about dinner, what she had made, whether Lily had eaten enough, a small proud detail about getting the proportions right on something she had never cooked before. It was the fourth letter where something shifted. I think I'm doing okay, Nora had written. I think Lily is okay. Some days are harder than other days, but I don't think about that too much because thinking about it doesn't help. I just do the next thing. That's what you always said. Just do the next thing. Daniel stopped reading for a moment. He looked out the window at the empty schoolyard. Then he kept going. The fifth letter was the longest. It talked about the electricity, about the notices on the door, about a night when Lily had a fever, and Nora had sat beside her until 4 a.m. counting her breaths. It didn't read like a complaint. It read like a report, a 14-year-old filing her own careful account of events, the same way Daniel filed his because writing things down made them feel manageable. The sixth letter was the shortest. I don't know how much longer I can be the one who holds everything together, but I don't say that to anyone. I'm only saying it to you because you're the only one I can say it to, and I know you won't tell. Daniel folded the letters carefully. He asked Patricia if he could include them. With Nora's knowledge and agreement, in the documentation for the court petition. Patricia said she would speak with Nora again. She said she thought Nora would say yes. She was right. 2 days later, Daniel added the letters to his folder. 6 pieces of lined notebook paper. Written by a 14-year-old to a woman who was no longer there to read them. He labeled them simply, in his own handwriting. At the top of the page they were clipped to. Evidence of bond, evidence of character, evidence of everything the official file missed. He closed the folder, and for the first time since this all started, he felt something that was almost like hope. The letters have changed everything. But there is still one person in this story Daniel hasn't truly faced, and that meeting will be harder than anything a courtroom could ask of him. We're not always the same thing, and the gap between them was where a lot of heartbreak lived. "I didn't wake up one day and choose this," Michelle said. Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that was working very hard. "I know," Daniel said. "Do you?" She looked at him then, directly, without the careful distance she had maintained since he sat down. "Because from the outside it probably looks like a series of bad choices, and some of it was. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I didn't make mistakes." She paused. "But some of it was also just falling, and not knowing how to stop. And by the time I understood what was happening, I was already so far down that I couldn't see the top anymore." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm not here to judge the past. I'm here because I want to make sure that whatever happens next, Nora and Lily go through it together." Michelle looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in her face. Not relief. Something more complicated than that. The expression of someone who has been braced for a certain kind of conversation and has just realized it is going to be a different one. "That's what I want too," she said, quietly, firmly. "Then we want the same thing," Daniel said. They sat in silence for a moment after that, not uncomfortable silence, the kind that comes after something true has been said and both people are letting it settle. When Michelle's name was called from the front desk, she stood, straightened her coat, and looked at him one last time. "Officer Harper," she said. "Yes. Thank you for going back." She walked down the hall. Daniel sat in that plastic chair for another minute, looking at the spot on the floor she had been looking at when he arrived. He wasn't sure what she had seen there. He picked up his folder, stood up, and walked out into the morning. Daniel now understands every side of this story. But understanding isn't enough, because someone is about to file a complaint that could take everything away from him before the fight even reaches the courtroom. Chapter 9. Allies and Obstacles. The complaint arrived on a Friday. Daniel found out the way he found out about most things he didn't see coming, from someone else, secondhand, in a hallway, in a tone of voice that was trying to be neutral and wasn't quite managing it. A colleague stopped him near the break room and said, quietly, that Captain Reeves wanted to see him before end of shift. Daniel knocked on the captain's door at 4:50. Reeves was at his desk with a single sheet of paper in front of him. He didn't offer Daniel a seat. That told him something before a word was spoken. "Someone filed a formal complaint this morning," Reeves said. "Against you." Daniel stood still. "The allegation is that you've been making unofficial visits to minors involved in an open case. That you're emotionally compromised, that your personal petition represents a conflict of interest serious enough to warrant an internal review." Reeves set the paper down. "The complaint was filed anonymously, but it's been accepted and it has to be processed." "Who would—" Daniel started. "I don't know," Reeves said, "and right now that's not the most important question." He looked at Daniel steadily. "The most important question is whether any of it is true." Daniel thought about the visits, the documentation, the morning he had sat across from Nora at the kitchen table and written down everything he observed. The afternoon he had driven to the school to read 6 letters written to a woman named Ruth. "Every visit I made was documented," Daniel said. "Every one." "Good." Reeves nodded once. "Then you have nothing to hide. But Daniel, this review is going to move slowly. And while it moves, everything you filed with the court is going to be under a different kind of light." He paused. "You understand what I'm telling you?" Daniel understood. He walked back to his desk and sat down and looked at his hands for a moment. 26 years. A clean record. 8 months from the finish line. And now this. He called Sandra Voss that evening. Sandra was the family court attorney who had agreed to support his petition. A woman in her 50s with a precise mind, and the particular kind of patience that came from spending decades watching systems move slowly and learning how to move with them. He told her about the complaint. There was a brief silence on her end. "It's a tactic," she said. "Someone doesn't want this petition to succeed, and they've found the most efficient way to slow it down. Can it derail the hearing? Not automatically, but it complicates things." Another pause. "We need to make sure your documentation is absolutely airtight. Every visit logged, every observation time-stamped. Nothing informal, nothing casual, nothing that can be read as overreach." She paused again. "And Daniel, we need more voices, not just yours." That was how the next 10 days began. Sandra reached out to Nora's school counselor, Patricia, who agreed to submit a formal statement. A neighbor who had known the girls for 2 years, a retired schoolteacher named Evelyn Cross, wrote a careful letter describing what she had observed from across the street over the past year. The school librarian, a quiet man named Mr. Bates, who had let Nora sit in the library during lunch for months without asking questions, submitted his own account. None of them were dramatic. None of them were loud. They were simply people who had noticed, who had been paying quiet attention, who had something true to say and were willing to say it in writing. Daniel read each statement as it came in and added it to the folder that had started as a few handwritten pages and had become something else entirely. The internal review continued in the background. Daniel answered every question asked of him. He produced every document requested. He was cooperative and precise, and gave them nothing they could use against him. But at night, sitting at his desk, he was aware of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Vulnerability, not weakness, just the particular feeling of having put something real into the world and knowing that the world might not receive it gently. He worked anyway. The hearing was 2 weeks away, and for the first time, Daniel was not walking into it alone. The hearing is coming. The courtroom will finally hear everything Daniel has spent weeks building. But will it be enough? And what will the judge decide when the law itself becomes the obstacle? Chapter 10. The hearing. The courtroom was smaller than Daniel remembered. He had been in this building before, years ago, for other cases, other testimonies. But standing in the hallway outside room 4 on a Tuesday morning, folder in hand, he felt the particular weight of a room he hadn't entered yet. Sandra was already there. She greeted him with a calm nod, the kind that said, "We are ready," without making any promises about outcomes. She was carrying her own folder, thicker than his, organized in the precise way that spoke of someone who had done this many times and understood that preparation was the only thing a person could fully control. They went in together. The room filled quietly. The opposing counsel, a procedural attorney named Gerald Marsh, sat on the far side with a composed expression and a yellow legal pad. The social worker was present. A representative from the department sat near the back, and in a chair near the front, slightly apart from everyone else, sat Nora. She was wearing a dark blue sweater. Her hands were in her lap. She looked straight ahead. Daniel sat down and did not look at her again. He didn't want her to feel watched. She had spent enough time being watched. The judge entered. Her name was the Honorable Patricia Odom, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain and the deliberate movements of someone who had decided long ago not to be hurried by anyone. She opened the session and moved through the preliminary matters efficiently. Then she looked up. "We are here to consider a petition for temporary joint guardianship filed by Officer Daniel Harper. Mr. Marsh, Ms. Voss, you'll each have time. Let's begin." Sandra went first. She was measured and clear. She presented the documentation, Daniel's logs, the observational records, the written statements from Patricia, from Evelyn Cross, from Mr. Bates. She spoke about the bond between the sisters in specific, concrete terms. She did not dramatize. She did not reach for emotion. She simply laid out what was true and let it stand on its own. Then she submitted the letters. Nora's 6 letters to her grandmother entered into the record as evidence of the sisters' relationship and of Nora's sustained commitment to her family over an extended period of difficulty. The room was quiet while Judge Odom read them. Genuinely quiet. The kind that meant something. Then Gerald Marsh spoke. He was respectful and methodical. He acknowledged Daniel's documented concern for the girls. He did not question his character. Then he raised what he called a structural matter, department policy, clearly written, that prohibited an active officer from petitioning for legal guardianship in a case that originated within his own jurisdiction. He cited the policy number. He provided the page reference. He submitted the documentation. Judge Odom looked at it carefully. Sandra responded, arguing that the policy applied to formal adoption proceedings, not temporary supervised guardianship, and that the distinction was meaningful and intentional. Marsh disagreed, calmly, specifically, with citations. Daniel sat at the table and kept his hands still, and listened to 2 attorneys argue about a policy that had nothing to do with Lily reaching for her sister in the backseat of a car, and understood, not for the first time, but more clearly than ever, the distance between what was right and what was written down. Judge Odom asked Daniel to take the stand. He did. She asked him to describe, in his own words, what he had observed over the course of his involvement with this case. He spoke for 11 minutes. He did not raise his voice. He did not appeal to emotion. He said what he had seen in the order he had seen it, with the same precision he had used when he first started writing things down in a notebook that was never meant to become a court document. When he finished, the room was quiet again. Judge Odom looked at him over her reading glasses. "Officer Harper," she said, "you understand that this court must operate within the boundaries of established policy." "Yes, Your Honor. And you understand that your intentions, however well documented, do not change what the policy says." "Yes, Your Honor." She looked at him for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then she said, "I'll take this under advisement. We'll reconvene Thursday." Court was adjourned. Daniel walked out into the hallway. Sandra fell into step beside him. "That went as well as it could have," she said. Daniel nodded. He wasn't sure what that meant anymore. "The judge has heard everything. Thursday is coming. And what she decides will either hold these 2 sisters together or pull them apart in ways that may take years to repair." Chapter 11. The ruling Thursday came the way hard days always do. Quietly, without warning. Just another morning that happened to contain something Daniel had been dreading for 2 weeks. He wore his uniform. He wasn't sure why. He wasn't there in an official capacity. But it was the thing he knew how to put on when he needed to feel like himself. Sandra met him outside room 4 at 9 o'clock. She looked at him carefully and said nothing. That told him something. They went in. The room felt different than Tuesday. Smaller somehow. The same pale walls, the same fluorescent light, but the air had a different quality. The specific stillness of a space where something has already been decided and is simply waiting to be said out loud. Judge Odom entered at 9:15. She sat down, arranged her papers, and looked at the room over her reading glasses. Then she began. She acknowledged the documentation. She acknowledged the statements. She acknowledged, in precise and careful language, that the evidence presented demonstrated a clear and significant bond between the 2 children, and that Officer Harper's conduct throughout had been, in her words, motivated by genuine concern, and carried out with consistent professionalism. Daniel heard all of it. He was waiting for the word that would follow. It came quietly, the way those words always do. However, department policy was unambiguous. An active officer could not serve as legal guardian in a case originating within his jurisdiction. The policy existed for reasons the court was not positioned to override. The petition, however well-intentioned and thoroughly documented, could not be granted within the current legal framework. The petition was denied. Daniel sat still. He heard Sandra exhale beside him, not dramatically, just the small release of someone who had hoped for a different outcome and was now adjusting. Judge Odom continued, Placement would proceed as originally recommended. Separate facilities. Effective that afternoon. The gavel came down. People began gathering their things. Daniel stayed in his chair for a moment longer than everyone else. Not because he couldn't move. Just because he needed a second to let the room be what it was before he walked out of it. He had done everything right. Every document, every visit logged, every statement gathered, every form filed in the correct order at the correct time with the correct language. And it wasn't enough. Not because he had failed, because the wall he had run into wasn't built from anyone's bad intentions. It was built from a policy written long before Lily ever reached sideways in a backseat looking for her sister. And policies didn't know about that. He walked out of the courthouse alone. Sandra had a call to take. He told her he was fine. He used the word without thinking and then stood on the front steps in his uniform and realized he wasn't entirely sure if it was true. He sat in his car for 40 minutes. He didn't call anyone, didn't write anything down. Just sat with the particular weight of having tried as hard as he knew how, and arrived at a place that didn't look like what he'd worked toward. Then he started the car, and he drove. The girls have been separated. Daniel has been turned away. But this story is not over, and what he does in the silence that follows will matter more than anything that happened in that courtroom. Chapter 12. Apart. The weeks that followed were the quietest of Daniel's career. He went to work. He answered calls. He filed reports. He did everything the job required with the same steadiness he had maintained for 26 years. From the outside, nothing had changed. From the inside, something had gone very still. He knew through Sandra and a sympathetic social worker named Diane Torres that Nora had been placed at the juvenile shelter on Caldwell Street, that she had stopped eating lunch in the common area and had started spending most of her time in her room, that she was polite to the staff and distant with everyone else. He knew that Lily was in a foster home across town, with a family who was kind and capable and completely unfamiliar, that she had started calling for Nora at night, that her speech, which had been developing steadily, had slowed in ways that concerned her temporary caregivers. Daniel was not allowed to visit either of them. He was off the case, officially, completely, without exception. So he wrote letters to the court, detailed notes to Diane Torres about the psychological research on sibling separation, a formal letter to the Child Welfare Office requesting that the girl's placement be reconsidered in light of documented behavioral changes, a request for a secondary review of the original placement recommendation. He wrote every evening after dinner, sat at his desk with his folder open and his pen moving and the house quiet around him. Then one evening, he stopped. He sat at the desk with a blank page in front of him and the pen in his hand, and nothing came. Not because he had run out of things to say, but because something in him had gotten very tired in a way that was different from physical tiredness. The kind of tired that asks a question a person doesn't always want to answer. What if it doesn't matter? He sat with that for a long time. The pen stayed in his hand. The page stayed blank. Then his phone rang. Sandra, he answered. I need to know if you're still writing, she said. No greeting, no preamble. I'm here, he said. That's not what I asked. A pause. I stopped tonight, he said. Just for tonight. Sandra was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was the same as always. Precise, calm, without drama. Daniel, if you stop, this closes. Not maybe. Not eventually. It closes. Diane needs material for the secondary review request. The court needs continued correspondence to keep the file active. If the letters stop, the file goes dormant and dormant files get closed. Another pause. I'm not saying this to pressure you. I'm saying it because you deserve to know exactly what's at stake. Daniel looked at the blank page. He thought about Nora in a room on Caldwell Street eating alone. He thought about Lily calling for someone who wasn't there. He thought about 6 letters written to a woman named Ruth. Just do the next thing. He put the pen to the page. I'll have something to Diane by morning, he said. Sandra said good. Then she said good night and hung up. Daniel wrote until midnight. When he finally went to bed, the house was dark and quiet, and felt for the first time in weeks like a place where something useful was happening. He didn't know yet how close the turning point was, but he had not stopped, and that would matter more than he knew. Daniel kept going. And somewhere across the city, something is about to shift in ways that no one saw coming, least of all Michelle. Chapter 13. Something shifts. Michelle had been in the program for 19 days when she almost left. It wasn't dramatic. That was the thing nobody tells you about those moments. They don't always arrive with noise and urgency. Sometimes they arrive quietly on a Tuesday afternoon, when a person is sitting on the edge of a bed in a small room, and the walls feel closer than they did the day before, and the voice in their head says, "This isn't working," in a tone that sounds almost reasonable. She had packed a bag, not everything, just enough. She was sitting with it at her feet when her counselor, a woman named Carol, knocked on the open door and came in without waiting for an answer. Carol had been doing this work for 22 years. She had learned to read rooms the way Daniel had learned to read calls, before she was all the way through the door. She sat down across from Michelle without looking at the bag. They talked for a long time. Carol didn't argue, didn't list reasons or consequences or statistics. She just asked Michelle one question and waited for the answer. "What do you want Nora to remember about this moment?" Michelle didn't answer right away. She looked at the bag at her feet. Then she unpacked it. She stayed. 2 weeks later, a court-ordered psychological evaluation was conducted on both girls independently. The evaluator was thorough and experienced. She spent time with Nora at the shelter, with Lily at the foster home, and produced a report that was precise and careful, and in certain sections, very difficult to read. It documented measurable changes in both girls since separation. Nora's withdrawal, Lily's regression in speech. The evaluator noted, in clinical language that nonetheless carried significant weight, that the separation itself appeared to be a primary contributing factor to the behavioral changes observed in both children. Diane Torres submitted the report to the court the same day she received it. Sandra filed a motion for emergency placement reassessment within 48 hours. She called Daniel the evening after she filed. "A second judge has been assigned," she said. Judge Odom recused herself, conflict of scheduling. "The new judge is Raymond Calloway. He's reviewing the full file." A pause. "Daniel, he has your original documentation, the logs, the statements, the letters, all of it." Daniel was standing in his kitchen when she said it. He set down the glass he was holding. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means that everything you wrote down, from the very first visit, is now in front of a fresh set of eyes. Eyes that weren't in that first courtroom." Another pause. "It means your documentation didn't just matter then. It matters now. Possibly more." Daniel stood very still. He thought about the first morning he had driven back to that house and told himself it was just procedure. He thought about the notepad, the grocery list, the bill with the red letters, every small, true thing he had written down, not because he was required to, but because he believed someone had to. "When will we know?" he asked. "Soon," Sandra said. "He's moving quickly." She said goodnight. Daniel stood in the kitchen for a long time after that. Outside the window, the evening was doing what evenings did, going dark slowly, without fuss, the way time moves when something important is quietly deciding its own direction. He didn't let himself hope too much, but he didn't stop hoping either. Judge Calloway has the file. Everything Daniel documented from the very beginning is now at the center of something new, and what happens next will finally give this story the turn it has been building toward. Chapter 14. Reunited. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon. Daniel was at his desk finishing a report when his phone lit up. Sandra. He answered on the second ring. She didn't say hello. She said, "Judge Calloway signed the order this morning. Emergency placement, joint sibling foster home. They move in together on Friday." Daniel didn't respond immediately. Sandra waited. "Together," he said. Not a question, just the word, out loud, to make sure it was real. "Together," Sandra said. "A home on Birchwood Lane, specialized in sibling placements. 2 other kids already there, both doing well. The family has a strong record." A pause. "Daniel, Your original documentation was cited directly in Calloway's written order. Your first written request, the one you filed after the drive in the patrol car. It established the legal record of their bond. That record is what made this argument possible. Daniel set his pen down. Around him, the precinct continued its ordinary afternoon. Phones ringing. Someone laughing near the break room. The familiar ambient sound of a place where he had spent more waking hours than anywhere else on Earth. He was aware of all of it, and none of it at the same time. "Is Nora being told today?" he asked. "This afternoon," Sandra said. "Diane is going in person." He thought about Nora in that room on Caldwell Street, eating alone, spending her time away from everyone, carrying the particular weight of someone who has learned not to expect things to get better, because expecting makes the not getting harder. He hoped she was sitting down when Diane told her. He hoped she let herself feel it. "And Lily?" he asked. The Foster family was notified this morning. Diane said Lily kept saying Nora's name when she heard it. Sandra paused. She said it 4 times. Daniel looked at the window across the room. Gray afternoon sky, ordinary Wednesday light. "Thank you, Sandra," he said, "for all of it." "You did the work," she said. "I just filed the papers." She hung up. Daniel sat at his desk without moving for a moment. A younger officer passed behind him and asked if he was all right. Daniel said yes. The officer nodded and moved on. Nobody else noticed anything. Daniel picked up his pen, set it down again, stood up. He went to the break room, poured a cup of coffee he didn't particularly want, and stood at the window that looked out over the parking lot and the street beyond it. An ordinary view he had looked at hundreds of times without really seeing. He thought about a Tuesday morning that had felt routine. A porch, a door opening before he knocked. 2 red-haired girls, one still, one small, standing together in a doorway that told a whole story before a single word was spoken. He thought about everything that had happened between that morning and this afternoon. All the paperwork, all the early mornings, the complaint, the hearing, the ruling that went the wrong way, the night he almost stopped writing, the pen that stayed in his hand. None of it had gone the way he planned. And yet here he was, standing at a window on a Wednesday afternoon, knowing that on Friday, Nora and Lily would walk into the same house together. Not his house. He was not their guardian. He had not won the case. The system had not bent to his will or his hope or his documentation. But the documentation had mattered. It had found its way into the right file at the right moment and been read by the right eyes, and had quietly, without ceremony, done what he had always believed it could do. He finished the coffee, washed the cup, went back to his desk. 8 months from retirement. He picked up his pen and finished his report. Nora and Lily are together. Daniel's work is done, even if he'll never fully know everything it set in motion. But there is one more moment coming. Small, quiet, and more powerful than anything that happened in a courtroom. Chapter 15. The card. Daniel retired on a Tuesday. No ceremony. He hadn't wanted one. Just the paperwork, a handshake from Captain Reeves, and the particular feeling of walking out of a building for the last time after 26 years, and noticing that the parking lot looked exactly the same as it always had. He drove home, made lunch, sat in the backyard for a while and watched the neighbor's dog investigate the fence line with great seriousness. It was an ordinary afternoon. He had expected it to feel larger somehow. It didn't. It just felt quiet. The weeks that followed found their own rhythm. He fixed things around the house that he had been meaning to fix for years. He started taking walks in the morning. He called Claire one evening, really called her, not a return call, not a response, just a call. And they talked for 40 minutes about nothing particularly important and everything that mattered. It wasn't resolved, whatever lived between them. But it was open in a way it hadn't been before. That felt like enough for now. The envelope arrived on a Thursday morning several months after his last day. Plain white, handwritten address, no return name. He opened it at the kitchen table with his coffee. Inside was a card, handmade, not store-bought. Folded cardstock with a small drawing on the front. 2 figures, one tall and one very small, standing in what appeared to be a backyard. The taller one had her arm around the smaller one. The smaller one appeared to be midlife, though it was hard to tell definitively because the artist was 3 years old and working with ambition that slightly exceeded current technical ability. Daniel looked at the drawing for a long time. He turned the card over. Inside, in careful, deliberate letters that belonged to someone who had learned to write with great intention, "Thank you for trying." Below that, 2 signatures. Nora's was neat and controlled, the handwriting of someone who took care with things. Lily's was enormous and enthusiastic, and took up considerably more space than the available room suggested was reasonable. Tucked behind the card was a small photograph, printed on regular paper, slightly uneven at the edges, the kind of photo someone prints at home because they want to send something real. 2 red-haired girls in a backyard, Nora with her arm around Lily. Lily mid-laugh, exactly as the drawing had suggested. Bright, ordinary daylight, a garden visible in the background. They looked like themselves. Daniel set the photo on the table beside the card and sat with both of them for a while. He wasn't sure how long. The kitchen was quiet. The morning moved at its own pace outside the window. Somewhere down the street a car passed. The neighbor's dog made a brief comment about something and then went silent. Daniel looked at the card. "Thank you for trying. Not thank you for saving us. Not thank you for fixing everything, just trying." He understood why she had written it that way. Nora had always been precise about what was true. She wouldn't claim more than what had happened. She wouldn't offer words that didn't fit the actual shape of things. And what had actually happened was this. A man had tried. The system had said no. He had kept trying anyway. And somewhere in the space between his persistence and the turning of 100 small wheels he would never fully see, 2 sisters had ended up in the same house. That was the true story. Not heroic, not simple, just human. Daniel propped the card against the fruit bowl where he would see it every morning. He put the photograph beside it. Then he picked up his coffee, walked to the back door, and stepped out into the yard. It was a good morning. Quiet and ordinary and completely, entirely enough. And that is the end of Daniel Harper's story. Or maybe just the beginning of the part he'll never know. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it today.